or the other to correct it. So a distraction or a compressive problem, when you want it to distract it, the correction is pretty much the same thing as we've learned for a pelvic shear. So this is not new stuff. So this is where you grab the distal tibia fibula. You want to be proximal to the joint. So I think the picture kind of shows the person holding the leg like this, but this is going to get into the ankle joint, so you want to avoid that. So I like to encircle so that I'm proximal to the malleoli, take my slack out, and then make my correction. Now when I make my correction, I'm not taking my slack out, letting go, and then pulling, because quite often that can send forces to the knee. If I take all my slack out and then make my correction, it tends to transmit through the knee, so it's not really particularly problematic. If a person has a knee issue where you don't want to do that, then the other correction is, and again, this is the same thing that we've learned for a pelvic shear. You can have them bring your leg up, put it over your shoulder, either interlace or one hand on top of the other into the inguinal region. Take your slack out. When you make your correction, you're going to follow along the plane of the table. So you're not going to pull up like that when you make your correction, which sometimes is a propensity to pull up like towards yourself. So you want to just, again, pull along the plane of the table. You don't want to be so close that there's no space, right? So a little bit of distance, and so when I pull, I can pull her thigh that way. So that's going to provide distraction of the acetabular femoral joint. Now, if there was a determination to involve concern about internal or external rotation, and as I mentioned in class, the way that you're going to make that determination in many respects is based on arch support of the person. So again, if a person has a fallen arch, their propensity is to immediately rotate, right? Both the tibia and the femur. If they are bow-legged, there's a propensity for external rotation, both of the tibia and the femur. So that could be one indication. The other indication could be they're laying on the table like that. Now, which one's externally rotated? Or they could be laying on the table like that. So it gives you information. Now, generally speaking, most people kind of are like this, where they're, straight up. Sometimes you will. What you're looking for is asymmetry. That is more of an indication of a problem. If a person was laying there and they're both kind of out like that, that's less problematic than if one is out and one is not, right? So this is another way that you can tell that there's a propensity towards internal or external rotation. So if you want to add that correction, if in the long lever position, which is where you're going to use the entire femur, is that when I made my contact at the inguinal region, that's called short lever, because right on the joint, right? So I'm kind of like right there making a correction. But this one I'm a long distance away, so that's why it's called long lever. So if I wanted to add internal rotation, I can take my inside hand and make it internally rotate and grab and do the same thing, right? If I want to do external rotation, I take my outside hand so that it's on the outside of my forearm and do the same thing. So that's the easy way to do that in the long lever position. And then the other thing for the hip is this picture that was in the notes. Again, I told you in class it was complex because what the picture was different than what the listing said it was. So if you want to evaluate somebody's ability to internally or externally rotate, you could do that with Hibbs test and a Baratovich test if they were prone. But in this position, what you can do, bring your leg up like this, and this is what that I'm doing now? This is internal rotation of the hip or the femur, and this is external rotation. So you can see external rotation is typically more than internal rotation. So this is one way to make your diagnostic evaluation to get a sense, are they symmetrical? Now to add a component of manipulation doing this, you want to have contact using the acetabular, or the greater trochanter. So if you look at this model here, so the person's hips up like this, right? And you're going to either be doing this or that, right? So your contact is going to be on the greater trochanter to facilitate the movement directly at the joint, So that again kind of makes it a little bit more short lever. And so what that looks like, if I want to put the patient into external rotation, I'm going to be facing caudad. And my contact is the back of my hand is on the outside of her leg. You see how that's happening? This other hand, I'm going to put my pisiform on her greater trochanter. So I think my correction kind of like that. So you see what I'm doing? When I'm making that contact, I'm pushing the femur like that with my contact hand. This hand is taking out the slack. If I wanted to correct it for internal rotation, I'm going to be facing cephalad, still the back of my hand on the lateral part of the patient's distal femur and or knee, and now she's in internal rotation. I'm going to use my pisiform on the greater trochanter and make kind of a correction this way. So again, what I'm doing is I'm connecting, making that happen. So that's the various ways for correcting, the femur or the acetabular joint if you need to distract it, using long lever, short lever. If you want to add the aspect of internal or external rotation in the long lever, this dynamic for the 90-90 of the hip that way for hip corrections. Now the last one, and there's no notes about this, and I didn't talk about it in class because frankly I forgot until last lab when I was lecturing. I'm like, oh my God! So this takes into account the fact that you might have kicked, and that has provided a distraction problem of the femur. So you need to correct that by compression, in the same way that we did a lot of compressive stuff in the shoulder. So we're going to do something similar in this joint. But one thing to take into account, when we do compression, if you look at the model here, so what I want to do is push the femur into the joint. But because of the femoral neck, it doesn't directly go into the joint, right? It kind of pushes back a little bit. So there's two moves or two components to hip compression. The first one is to push this down, and the second one is you're going to place your hands on the hip and on the greater trochanter and kind of bang it in. So what that looks like, the knee comes up to 90 degrees, and then I'm going to either cup or one hand over the other, and then kind of use my sternum on the distal part of the femur, press down, and then just push. And then the second part is to straighten out the leg, find the greater trochanter, put my hand on it, just kind of hit it in like that. So I'm going to hit my palm with this part of my fist. Not really like that, just kind of like that, yeah.
When you did the first one,
the compression,
did you push on the side? I didn't see that.
I just kind of get it set up,
straight down.
and then just straight down.
Oh, straight down.
And then straighten out, find it, and then just bang it a little bit. Doesn't need to be like sledgehammer down, because that takes into account the the femoral head. You want to just kind of push it back into the joint. So you're helping with compressive. So those are the things for the hip. So they're written up there. It says hip distraction, hip compression, hip rotation, pubic symphysis, which you already did. So we'll practice those up, and then we'll come back and finish up with the knee.